Why do we have a task force? Where is this journey taking us? And a look at the Scranton Strangler comic book in this episode of the Anti-Strangling Task Force. We're making a Scranton Strangler comic book. And immediately you must be asking, why? Why are we doing this? Well, the Scranton Strangler Mystery is a game. And like every game, we have rules, instructions, a beginning, a middle, and an end. To understand the Scranton Strangler game in its entirety, there are three motifs that we need to be conscious of. The Mad Libs motif, the task force motif, and the comic motif. Mad Libs forms its own motif through the show. We see on two occasions this game being played, once with Michael and the rest of the office.
Apparently, Michael has come up with a Dunder Mifflin Mad Lib.
And another time with Angela and Andy.
Okay. Adjective.
Tall. No, nice.
The tall man entered the nice building to visit a very nice man. Sit down, Mr. Smith. Could I interest you in any good cat food?
Now, in a normal game of Mad Libs, we would be the ones who decide the nouns, the verbs, the places, the names, the dates, and the rest of it. And the connecting parts of the story are provided to us. However, in the Scranton Strangler version of the game of Mad Libs, this has been inversed. The blank spaces are given to us, but the connecting words we need to figure out. So in a nutshell, the game we're playing is an inverse game of Mad Libs. The creators are going to give us the names, the events, the times, the places, and we need to connect them together into a coherent narrative. That's the game. Well, how do we go about doing this? What are the instructions for this game? Well, the creators give us the answer via another motif. In this case, the task force motif.
Michael has authorized me to form an emergency anti-flashing task force.
Question. Won't that interfere with your other task forces?
Answer. No, because this is being given priority 1. Anti-flashing task force!
When I joined Dunder Mifflin, their web presence wasn't the greatest, so I created a youth task force.
We did it. Youth Task Force forever.
Yes. You have to shut down Youth Task Force. I'm not sure if you need to start a new task force to do that, but please just do whatever it takes.
I am sorry that was so awkward for you two in that meeting, but I am going to have to reassemble the youth task force.
So we see on at least two occasions, Dwight and Nellie form their own task forces. And as I've said a dozen times, repetition forms a motif, and therefore this motif requires interpretation. So what is the interpretation? To form a task force. Anti-Strangling Task Force has been publicly active for a number of months now and is a world-first dedicated task force to solving the Scranton Strangler Mystery. The creation of this task force signaled the start of the game. But why do the creators want us to form a task force? Well, let's look at a couple of the challenges we've already covered on this channel. In Scranton Strangler episode titles, we discussed how the episode titles are all mixed up, and one of our challenges is to assign the correct title to the correct episode. In Great Scott Film Forensics, we discussed how there are 240 films referenced throughout the series, with the challenge being for us to put together this list of 240 films. In the Extraterrestrial Time Traveling Task Force overview, we discussed how Dwight Schrute is a time traveler and how we need to monitor the changes in the time-space continuum. These are just some of the challenges that we face, and this is the reason why we need the task force. The creators know they made a difficult challenge, which is why they are encouraging us to work as a team to solve the mystery. Okay, so we understand what the game is. We understand how to start it, and we also understand how to play it. But when does it end? How does the game end? Well, this brings us to the third motif, the comic motif.
Yes, I have a date. He's a cartoonist for the local paper.
Alan's cartoon's so funny, right? So, Alan, Pam is obsessed with your cartoons. She reads them every day.
So how do you come up with your cartoons?
Or dream them.
You dream in cartoons? How fun.
And sure I can't use, like, the cartoons from the newspaper?
500 boxes has gone out with the image of a beloved cartoon duck performing unspeakable acts upon a certain cartoon mouse that a lot of people like.
I don't care. It was disgusting. Cartoon characters having sex?
If cartoon characters didn't have sex, then how would we get new cartoon characters?
Yeah, it's okay. I don't think the cartoons are very funny.
Wait. What cartoons?
The cartoon that goes with each article.
Oh, it's good.
What are you laughing at? Are you laughing at me?
We're laughing at this cartoon.
Perfect, isn't it?
But I've learned to love again. He's a cartoon sailor. So this year I made him something. A comic book.
The Adventures of Jimmy Halpert. Oh my God. This is awesome. That's my bike. That's my desk. And that is my daughter.
Very funny, everyone. Who wrote captions under my doodle?
And I will take you all down.
You?
I've been reading the comics to my daughter since she was 3 years old.
Ta-da!
Yes, let's.
Nope. It's called hentai, and it's art.
I used to be young and cute and sort of funny, and I could do those cute little cartoons.
When I was young, I spent several years at a private school where I was told I would be taught to harness my mutant abilities. Turned out, it was a con man copying Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters from the X-Men comic books.
We have a number of references to comic books and comics and drawing throughout the series, with the prime example being Pam's gift to Jim, The Adventures of Bear Man comic. Now, it's a clear motif, so we need to apply some form of interpretation. What are the creators trying to tell us? The interpretation, in the context of what we've covered so far, is relatively straightforward. The creators want us to make a comic of the Scranton Strangler story. Once we've found all the pieces, once we've connected them into a coherent story, they want us to bring the story alive via a comic book, via paper. This is the end of the game, and this is exactly what we are going to do. So I wanted to share some concept art today with you guys around the first draft of the Scranton Strangler comic book cover. I wanted to overview the contents of the cover and also do a brief summary of all the story building blocks that we've covered so far on the channel. Now I want to remind everyone that this is a draft, so the Anti-Strangling Task Force is certainly going to have a say in this process during the investigation, but this is just a concept to get us going. For now, however, I have titled the comic book Shelford Infinity. Now, there's evidence to suggest that Dwight's real surname is actually Shelford. Now, I have mentioned in a number of other episodes that Dwight was abducted as a baby, and that would mean that his adopted name, or the name that his abductors gave him, was Dwight Schrute, but that is not his original name. Believably, his birth name is actually D. Shelford. We need to listen carefully to what Dwight tells us in this scene.
Back then, my life was so great that I literally wanted a second one. In my second life, I was also a paper salesman, and I was also named Dwight. Absolutely everything was the same, except I could fly.
Everything was the same except that he could fly. So the flight is the only difference, which must mean his name is also Shelford. His first name, Dwight, is also likely from his abductors, as we do see Dwight referred to as D a number of times.
What can I say? Old habits die hard.
D?
Oh, D. Oh, D. She called you D.
Oh, D!
So Dwight, in searching for his real parents, likely stumbled across some documentation which listed his name as D. Shelford. Now, there's actually more significance to this name and more evidence to support this, but we're not going to be covering that in this episode. So I know I've probably jumped ahead a little bit here by putting it in the title, but that's where we get the Shelford from. Now, the infinity relates to the infinite time loop that Dwight Schrute finds himself in. In the extraterrestrial time traveling task force overview, we discussed how Dwight is in an infinite time loop and that he's trying to break out of it or trying to Kobayashi Maru himself out of this situation. So the way that we're going to write the comic book is so that it's read in a time loop, that the last page seamlessly connects to the first. So that's where we get this temporary title from. Shelford Infinity. Now let's take a look at Shelford. The outfit is inspired from an image of Dwight as a teenager. We do find out in the later seasons that Dwight went to X-Men school, and we do actually have two images of Dwight whilst he was at X-Men school. There is a green version of this outfit and the blue version, and I've chosen the blue because I think it just fits a little bit better, but this is inspired from that image. We can also see that Dwight is wearing his time traveling glasses. And for those of you who have seen the extraterrestrial time traveling task force, you'll know that this is how Dwight utilizes his time traveling capabilities via the Terminator styled sunglasses. Now, with that in mind, you'll notice that Dwight is in a power stance because in this image, he's about to travel through time. This is 1 millisecond before Shelford vanishes back to the future. But where was he? He was in North America during the time of the Indian Americans. You'll notice that we have two Native American Indians in the background. They're throwing their tomahawks at Shelford as he's about to travel through time. Now, this image was inspired by a painting of the Lenape people, and my apologies if I'm incorrectly pronouncing that right, but I do believe historically they were in the vicinity of Scranton at that time. So I've tried to keep it historically accurate, and that's where we get that Native American inspiration from. Now, when Dwight first details the time loop he finds himself in, we find out that one phase of this loop is the hunter's phase.
But my ancestors never worked in corporate America. They were farmers. And before that, hunters. And before that, time travelers. And before that, me again. At least that's how the legend goes.
Now, at this stage in the investigation, it is assumed that the hunter's phase of the time loop was during the time of the Native American Indians, before North America was colonized by the European powers. We have a very strong Native American motif throughout the show, so that's where we're drawing that inspiration from. Now, what he was doing there and why he was there, we still need to investigate, and we're going to have to connect a few more dots. But that's the overall inspiration for the comic book cover. Now, I did also want to summarize all the building blocks that we've currently covered on the channel. And these are all elements that we're going to have to connect together into a coherent narrative and that we will ultimately put to paper via the Shelford Infinity comic. Some of these things include Dwight gaining his time traveling capability. Where did he get the glasses from? Dwight's abduction as a baby. Dwight being raised from the dead. Pam as his accomplice or the medium suspect. Pam being the office mattress. Jim actually being gay. The Yakuza and how they got involved at Dunder Mifflin. Drug importation. Michael's trip to Australia to import drugs. A turf war between the Yakuza and the Triads. Michael being bisexual. The murder in the forest. Dwight's clone. When did he get his clone? Dwight's robot. When did he get the robot version of himself, and how? Angela's affair with Mose. Dwight fighting his peers to get breastfed as a baby. Dwight's adopted family's Nazi past. Pam's affair with Brian. And last but certainly not the least, all of Dwight Schrute's murders. Now guys, these are not all the building blocks that we've covered on the channel. There are actually more than this, and I'm gonna have to put together an Excel spreadsheet on Google Docs and give access to all of you guys so you can also stay up to date with all the things that we've covered. But ultimately what the game is to connect all these pieces into a story, and that is what we're going to make the comic book out of. Now, we're nearing the end of this episode, and I did want to inform you guys on some changes to the investigation format and process. Moving forward, Reddit is going to be the center of the investigation. If you haven't joined the Anti-Strangling Task Force Reddit, please do. We want to make sure everybody's contributions are recognized and that this really is a task force, right? That we're all coming together to solve the mystery. Now, Patreon will still be active, but the headquarters of the task force will no longer be on Patreon. Instead, patrons are going to be closer to the comic book project. They're also going to help to make this project a reality. One of the benefits of joining Patreon will be Discord access, and this will also include episode rewatches where I sort of give some direction to the task force for things to look for or mysterious elements which need to be considered or solved. So I hope this is now a lot more straightforward. And this is ultimately where we are heading. The end of the game is this comic book. The story of Shelford Infinity.
My ancestors never worked in corporate America. They were farmers. And before that, hunters. And before that, time travelers. And before that, me again. When I was young, I spent several years at a private school where I was told I would be taught to harness my mutant abilities.
Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the Anti-Strangling Task Force on Patreon for exclusive episode analysis.